Today we'll be taking a look at a movie called Dread, not to be confused with the movie called Dread. Unfortunately, we're not quite privileged enough to be graced with an entire movie solely revolving around Karl Urban's Stankface, but luckily we're able to explore an interpretation of a Clive Barker short story. Stories which tend to be full of sunshines, rainbows, and horrors beyond our wildest imagination. What makes this extra interesting is that the year prior, the director of this movie also executively produced another movie adaptation of a Clive Barker story, The Midnight Meat Train, that we covered the other week. A movie which consists of a bunch of men getting their meat out on a train. Beginning in one of the worst places possibly imaginable, a philosophy class, we're then introduced to one of our main characters, Stephen, as he's being indoctrinated by Plato. After class, he then meets another student named Quaid, as they begin discussing the class and talking about how instead, they should be discussing the things that they don't understand and the things that they fear the most. Like the menstrual cycle, the pair end up quickly becoming friends and go out for a few drinks together, where Quaid, rather socially unaware, proceeds to get Stephen to talk about his older brother and how he died in a drunk driving accident due to not being skilled enough. After having a nice conversation, reminiscing about how Stephen's brother became red paste on the side of the road, Quaid heads home to engage in the rather fun pastime of downing a bunch of prescription pills after a night of drinking alcohol. He seems to do this due to either having an overactive imagination, or to suppress a traumatic event from his childhood, which involved him watching a man break into his home and brutally hacking his parents to death with an axe, before running straight towards him due to getting him confused with a good-looking piece of firewood. As a little boy, Quaid watched on in horror as this large, intimidating man repeatedly took an axe to his mother's skull, before being tormented by the man as he tells him that bits of his parents are dripping from the end of his axe. And after speaking to the literal 6-year-old about the contents of his parents' craniums, the man then suddenly turns into a pit bull at the sight of an infant and begins sprinting full speed towards the boy while foaming at the mouth. This, understandably, left Quaid quite traumatized. He doesn't understand how he could have possibly survived against the giant pit bull man, and this has led him to an obsession with painting naked women. Nothing like looking at a naked person to forget what your mother's brain cavity looks like. Stephen walks into Quaid's basement to find him painting a nude model, and after proceeding to look directly at her boobies like some kind of pervert, he watches as Quaid proceeds to completely undress right in front of him and get in the shower. But it's cool, teenage boys expose themselves to their buddies all the time. It's just part of growing up. With his balls still wet, Quaid then propositions Stephen with the idea of conducting a fear study. He wants to create a survey on people's fears while documenting it all on camera, something which he suggests that Stephen can use for his thesis. And at first, Stephen is hesitant to go along with it, but is quickly sold on the idea due to the overwhelming charisma that Quaid brings to the table, mixed with his autism, that causes him to have absolutely no filter. Like when they go out for drinks to celebrate and end up bringing 2 women home, because it turns out that they were just homeless and offering them a place to stay for the night. And speaking of using women, this reminds Stephen that he needs to get an editor on board, so he convinces his friend Cheryl to join them to help edit the project. And just like that, they're the 3 musketeers, except with more emo hair and a lot more mummy issues. After putting out flyers, due to this being before the extreme takeover of social media, and thus people still being able to notice things in the real world, they quite quickly start to accumulate a group of volunteers to talk about their deepest, darkest fears. But apart from rather tame things, ranging from spiders and heights, and also some dude worried about a worm crawling into his penis, the study hasn't quite got to the level of intensity that Quaid was after. He wants raw, primal, unfiltered emotion that doesn't involve things crawling into places that they don't belong. Because of this lack of satisfaction at the despair of others, this causes Quaid's already eccentric personality to become even more controlling and overbearing, to the point that he loses his temper and forcefully removes Stephen's watch from his wrist and stomps on it, due to Quaid being jealous that Stephen knows what time is. The pair are about to break out into a fistfight, due to really loving to touch other men's faces with their hands, until Cheryl decides to de-escalate the situation between them by asking the pair if she can be interviewed while promising to deliver on what Quaid wants. Which is then exactly what she proceeds to do, as this little weirdo is completely engrossed by the idea of her trauma, as she explains why she's a strict vegan. After hiding that for the entire length of the movie so far, and finally being able to blurt out that she's a vegan, she explains that her father used to work long hours in a meat packing plant, where he and his buddies could pack their meat all night long. But due to her father suffering from the fact that he's a little bit of a wrong'un, he'd return home from work in the middle of the night and molest her, while stinking of raw meat from the factory. Stephen is visibly disturbed by what he's hearing and tells Cheryl that she doesn't need to continue on, while Quaid appears to be completely enamored by hearing about her worst possible memories, almost as if he's feeling a sort of euphoria from it by watching her relive that part of her life. But after talking about her dad's smelly meat and seeing that Quaid is so obviously into it, she attempts to turn it onto him by asking him what his biggest fear is, which is apparently being asked this very question, as he then proceeds to turn the camera off and refuses to talk about it due to not being able to handle his own reality. But what this does, apart from reveal the fact that Quaid is actually a little baby boy who doesn't like to talk about his feelings, is trigger something in him, and not like a weird fetish after stumbling across a website you really shouldn't have at a young age. He proceeds to go into his bathroom and tip out all of his medication, as he no longer wants it to hold him back from seeing his true vision. His true vision being schizophrenia. The effects, which he almost immediately gets to experience, as that night Stephen is staying over due to missing his last train, and Quaid wakes up after falling asleep to hearing the sound of banging. Thinking that it's just his parents, he then discovers that it is them banging, but not in the way that he thought. He sees the killer from his childhood repeatedly hacking his father to pieces, with the weight of the axe creating the thumping sound, before then turning to see himself as a younger child sitting next to his butchered mother while playing in a pool of her blood. But it turns out that it was all just a dream, as he wakes up screaming as Stephen comes running to see if he's okay. After learning that Quaid is actually fine and he just has a really unusual sounding alarm clock, Stephen eventually manages to get him to open up. Well, not in the same way his mother opened up, but emotionally. He tells Stephen that when he was 6 years old, both of his parents were horrifically killed in front of him using his father's own axe, and the killer was never caught. And something about Quaid experiencing such a horrific thing at such a young age has made him want to seek it out in other people, instead of confronting his own demons himself. And that's exactly what he wants from Stephen. After learning about his older brother dying in a drink-driving accident due to not being skilled enough, Quaid finds and buys the same model car with the exact same paint job, and gives it to Stephen so he can, quote, find the beast. The Mr. Beast. After the initial, somewhat unsuccessful interviews, eventually the group land on someone with something genuinely interesting to share. Well, apart from the penis worms guy. They interview someone named Joshua, who explains that when he was younger, he was hit by a car due to unfortunately being a small child and not a piece of the road. Because of this, the resulting head injury resulted in him losing his hearing for 3 years straight, where he would be completely deaf. He might have his hearing back now, but Joshua is clearly struggling to get his words out, as talking about this deeply upsets him. It's what brings him the most terror in life, the thought that once again, he could lose his hearing at any time. Something which has Quaid fully engrossed, as once again he's been able to listen to someone directly tell him their deepest fears. But not only the fear itself, but the reason behind it, which is arguably what Quaid is looking to hear the most with his strange little sadistic ears. Wanting to blow off a little bit of steam, Quaid decides to head to the strip club, not for the reason that one might go to a strip club to blow off steam, that is, waste your money, but to ask the girl who he regularly paints if she'd be available, which she isn't. Upset that he's now forced to go and begrudgingly look at some naked women dance, he suddenly can see the man who hacked his parents up. He then watches as the woman in front of him starts suffering from the rather strange side effects of working in a place like this, as her skin suddenly starts to split open, as if she's being repeatedly hit by an axe, which seems to make Quaid freak out at the sight of a naked woman. Another one of Stephen's friends, Abby, who's made multiple appearances in the movie so far, but none important enough to mention in this video, asks him if he can come over alone to her dorm and interview her for the project. But what this really is some sort of elaborate woman plan to get him alone in a room where she proceeds to undress in front of him and attempt to sleep with him. Using her sex magic tricks, she tells Stephen that she's always been ashamed of her birthmark and has known that she's been different since she was 5 years old, after being asked what's wrong with your face. Upset, vulnerable, and also a little bit horny, she then removes her clothes and tries to kiss Stephen, where he then proceeds to nicely reject her. He tells her that he can't do this with her because his heart is somewhere else right now, in his chest, and not his penis. He's got feelings for Cheryl and wants to pursue them instead, as he hasn't got time for women throwing themselves at him. After telling Quaid about this, and also being mocked by him for not just sleeping with her, Stephen convinces him to go and see her and retrieve the camera that he left there after blueballing her. And while there, Quaid starts to use his charismatic ways to make Abby feel better by telling her that she's beautiful. This results in them going out to drink and dance together, eventually culminating in Quaid taking her back to his place to paint her topless, in a weird bit of foreplay before sleeping together. But unfortunately for him, the mood is somewhat ruined, as he then suddenly sees her laying on the bed, cut in half with her guts across the room. After rolling around in Abby's guts, and not in the fun way, we then see Stephen and Cheryl as their feelings towards each other start to become known as they finally kiss. After Quaid sees someone's insides and the other pair make out together, we then see what appears to be Quaid finally being interviewed. and after talking for a while, we then see from a different perspective that he's actually talking to no one. And after watching Quaid be about as mentally stable as your average YouTuber, the group then interview another person who at first glance seems to have something genuine to offer. A woman who claims that she suffered from severe agoraphobia for over 20 years and couldn't leave the house due to being afraid of people named Agora. She was entirely reliant on her mother, who she loved and simultaneously hated due to the control that she had over her life. But eventually, her mother would die of a heart attack, and it wouldn't be until 3 weeks later that someone would eventually discover her body after the neighbours noticed a foul smell. All of which is completely made up, as for some reason, Quaid is almost immediately able to tell, causing him to flip out in a rage and assault this random woman for daring to lie to him. Quaid, in his infinite wisdom and healthy state of mind, doesn't see the wrong in what he's just done. Because she lied to him, he thought it was completely within his rights to physically attack her. And after being told by Steven and Cheryl that you can't just go around attacking women after they annoy you, he then reveals to them that the study was never just about some school project, as for him it was far more than that. Having the reaction of an angry toddler, but with the body of a fully grown man, he then proceeds to destroy the video camera, before taking a baseball bat to Cheryl's computer, containing all of the recorded footage. This slight overreaction causes Cheryl to leave after all of her belongings were just brutally destroyed by an immature man-child, before Steven punches him in the face for having a stupidly punchable face. The next day, Steven arrives at college fully expecting to fail, to learn that he's somehow been graded an A on his thesis, despite the contents of his thesis sitting inside of a broken computer. Quaid arrives and tells him that he had backups of all of their files, and that he's sorry for being such a giant man-baby. After making the incredibly smart decision of getting in this car with a slightly mentally unstable gentleman, Quaid tells Steven that he wants to carry on with their research, despite the project being finished. But Steven, not entirely thrilled by the prospect of doing schoolwork when there's no school to give it to, tells him that he doesn't want to, which causes Quaid to once again handle rejection like the mature adult that he is, as he then pulls out a flask and starts drinking while driving the exact same car that Steven's brother died in. Thinking that this will somehow convince Steven to continue their research together, he's then shocked to discover that after driving full speed towards a wall and braking at the last possible second, that Steven wants absolutely nothing to do with him. And without knowing that Quaid had turned their assignment in for them and had attempted to pancake Steven against a wall, Cheryl had gone over to his house in an attempt to recover the hard drive from the scene of the temper tantrum. But while there, she discovers a secret door, which reveals a room filled with Quaid's naked women portraits, who all happen to contain multiple axe wounds. Not being impressed by his rather average modern art, she then attempts to leave the house, with Quaid suddenly returning home. A week then passes, and Steven starts to become concerned after not hearing from his girlfriend this entire time, as he starts to get suspicious why things are surprisingly peaceful. And as he's walking through the halls of his college, he walks past a room with Abby and a group of people huddled around a TV. It's the footage from Steven's interview with her that Quaid was supposed to destroy, but instead of doing that, he's broadcasted it to the entire college, as they all get to see Abby's deepest and darkest fears. And her boobs. Her biggest fear was being seen as that little 5-year-old girl who thought there was something wrong with her, and now absolutely everybody knows it. And after he's done non-consensually broadcasting naked videos of people around the college, Quaid then invites Joshua back to his place under the pretense of continuing their interview. But because Quaid is a little bit strange in the head and doesn't really understand social cues, he then proceeds to hit Joshua over the head with a bottle instead of offering it him. Joshua then eventually comes to from his surprise nap to discover that he's been restrained and has 2 glass jars attached to his head in an attempt to completely block his hearing. But unfortunately for both Joshua and Quaid, the glass bottles only appear to be impairing his hearing and not entirely stopping it. So, switching to plan B, with zero hesitation whatsoever, Quaid then removes the glass jars from Joshua's head before firing a gun point blank next to his eardrums, causing them to burst and bleed. Terrified and in complete agony, Joshua then starts crying out for his mother while unable to hear anything. All the while, Quaid is excitedly starting to film him while watching this man's deepest fear come true. After documenting his findings and getting all of the information he needs from Joshua, as if he was nothing more than a piece of trash, Quaid proceeds to drop him off in a dark alleyway somewhere and leaves him there completely on his own, terrified, bloody and disoriented, which sounds like the end of an average night out in the UK. After Abby ran off in horror after everybody had witnessed her on TV, Steven then gets a phone call from the distressed woman who asks him if he'd like her if she was pretty, with her idea of pretty meaning suffering from 3rd-degree chemical burns and looking like a feral ghoul from Fallout. As she then proceeds to fill up a bathtub with bottles of bleach before using a metal scour to remove her birthmark while pouring said bleach directly into the wound. Realizing that this probably wasn't her greatest idea, with all of her orifices now burning more than the next day after Taco Tuesday, she then exits her room and begins walking down the hallway while completely covered in blood, before being found by Stephen, who decided to look absolutely everywhere for her except her dorm room. Joshua and Abby are then both taken to the same hospital, unaware of each other's presence in the building, and Joshua, now completely deaf, spots Stephen walking through the halls and think that he was in on it. Stephen stops to look at a fire axe on the wall and decides that it's time for Quaid to taste some of his own medicine, except his medicine doesn't contain paracetamol and instead chopped up parts of his mummy. Quaid's woken up to the sound of something thumping in his house and discovers Stephen standing at the bottom of the stairs holding an axe. Freaking out and thinking that it's the killer coming back for him, Quaid retreats to his bedroom while Stephen goes all The Shining on the door. That is until Quaid eventually remembers that he has a gun, and gun always beats fire axe, before charging out of the room with it and knocking Stephen unconscious. Stephen eventually comes to as he's restrained to a chair as a video of Cheryl locked in a room with nothing but a piece of cooked meat, a bucket, and some water starts to play. Realizing that she's about to have the most boring meal of her life, Stephen then proceeds to get extremely angry and starts demanding answers. She'd been kept in that room for days with nothing but the meat that had slowly started to rot. With no way out, eventually Cheryl started to hallucinate and took after Quaid by having a full-blown conversation with herself, with Quaid then explaining to Stephen that he heated the room up to speed up the decomposition, resulting in flies finding it and laying their eggs inside. After several more days of being trapped inside without her smashed avocado on toast, her need to eat to survive simply outweighs her disgust at the thought of eating meat, as she now picks up the rotten piece of flesh which now has maggots sprouting out of it and devours it down to the bone. And after they're done watching Quaid's funny little home video, they suddenly hear a noise coming from somewhere in the house. Quaid goes to investigate while Stephen manages to free himself, and after retrieving a knife from the kitchen, he's almost able to sneak up behind Quaid with it, when suddenly a dumb, deaf and blind Joshua, except without the dumb and blind part, comes running towards them with an axe and plants it straight into Stephen's chest. Joshua starts cry-laughing in a delirious state, when suddenly Quaid, who only sees the man who killed his parents, aims and fires at him. While Stephen is rapidly bleeding out and dying on the floor, Quaid then proceeds to tower over his body and look him directly in the eyes as his last bit of life leaves his body. Once he's sure that Stephen is well and truly no longer Stephen anymore, he then drags his body down into the basement before opening a locked door to reveal Cheryl inside, where he then dumps the body of her boyfriend before locking her in with her latest meal. And before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a massive shout out and a big thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who go out of their way every month to continue supporting the channel. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or a patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great help, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to all uncensored versions of videos. So starting off with this week's new YouTube signups, a big thank you to Hell Nor Heaven, Rashu Mont, Justin Paws, Labyrinth 2100, Toaster Beamer, Miss Magpie, Washal Gawai, Riley Zane, Zaza Lord, Zach Bennett, Anthony925, Celogram, Mafri Sabo, Levin, TXC0, Gualberto Carrion, Def the Kid 845, Thanos Gaming 145, Olaf422, Marius Hawkland, Di Shipton, Zane Monroe, Ghost V8, Bozzabarrel the Fowl, Harangue, and Harvey Lazada. Now heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to the Periwinkle Boy, Cash Bussy, Sigma Taletta 22, Ella Hanny, Alex, Jared Lamando, Catty K, Thomas Herbert, Matthew Shawns, Kevin Barney, Oud Zed, Canon Lakota, Demarco 5, Henry Simon, Voy, Ian Fraser, Lucas, Berry303, Rachel Dickel, MDGX, Honku, Ben Riley, Erin Wilson, Malachi Benson, Izek, Jay Medina, Alex, Varane, Odin Williams, Jaquez, Jaden, Brian H, Nebs, M, Noah, and Anti-Doom. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.